Hey, guess what, everybody? Go listen to the Break It Down show.
Hey, this is John.
And this is Pete.
And this week's guest...
Jerome Preisler.
Yeah, man.
He's an author, a best-selling author.
Yeah, and he knows a lot about baseball.
Yeah, he's done some work with the Yankees, writing and reporting about them.
And his book, First to Jump, is about the band of brothers in World War II, the Pathfinders, who were the misfits and miscreants and who went in to kick the asses of people that everybody else was afraid to kick, or went on missions that everybody else was afraid to go on.
Yeah, these guys picked suicide missions and volunteered for them multiple times. And when they say suicide missions, they really mean it. I mean, you're talking a World War II jump behind lines before the paratroopers jumped in. These guys were there to say, land here. So the planes that they were on, that were all giant planes, all side by side, weren't supposed to make it. The guys falling out of the sky fell at such a low altitude, they weren't supposed to make it. They were getting shot at while they were in the air, jumping right into the hands of the Germans, who would consider them spies and rightfully shoot them on sight. And they said yes to go do this mission.
And besides that, Jerome Preisler is cool. So here it is. Check him out. We think you're going to like it. Ladies and gentlemen, Jerome Preisler.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. I'm glad you guys, glad that Jim hooked us up.
Yeah, we're excited about that. By the way, it's cold here and foggy and 52, but that's cold for us.
52 would be toasty right now.
Yeah, that stinks.
I don't even like to say things like that, man, because New Yorkers and just folks who are used to climates just think we're pansies.
Jerome knows. He's been around.
Yeah.
He understands.
I realize that, but when we say words like, it's cold, it's 52.
Yeah. Well, you know, my in-laws, my father-in-law just passed away, but they lived in Florida for the last 20 years. And he would call up, and they actually had come from Wisconsin, so they were used to really brutally cold winters. So when they moved to Florida, they suddenly became, the real Floridians. So they call us up, and they'd get like a cold snap of, it would be 65 degrees, and they'd be like, we can't stand it anymore.
Yeah. I used to live in Fort Lauderdale, and that's so true. Like, I was able to acclimatize because I left a lot because I worked in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so my body was kind of used to, like, what weather is this? But the folks there, they'd sweatshirt up like anything in the 70s.
Yeah.
It's cold.
But, it really is all relative, because my wife, we have a place up in Maine. We spent the better part of a decade mostly up there. And now now we're back to being mostly in New York. But when we were up there, I mean, I just checked. I have the Weather Channel app on my phone, and we're going through a really bad cold snap here. And it's been very cold. It was the other day, it was 8 degrees. But in Maine, it was minus 14. That's not wind chill. That was the temperature.
Whoa. Oh my God.
So, it's funny, because after living there spending many winters there for the better part of between 2000 and 2008, or 1999, 2008, when we come here and everybody be complaining, even, when they complain about a quarter inch of snow. And I remember our last winter there, which was full winter there, which was either 07 or 08, but it was brutal. It was like there was never a thaw. So you would get like a foot and a half of snow, and then you get, even if it was just like a piddling 3 inches or 4 inches, it wouldn't leave. So everything was just piling and piling and piling and piling until we just had a narrow path. I couldn't shovel anymore, leading out of our door. That was the worst winter. Plus I had a dog, large dog, a greyhound that was getting up there in years, and she couldn't walk that well. So trying to negotiate that kind of snow, I just said, that's enough. That was actually our last winter there. Couldn't do it anymore.
Wow. A greyhound's not exactly built for winter climates either.
No, exactly. They really get cold fast. They really aren't. So it was rough on her. We adopted her from a track right that was up there. And that's why, but they're not made for that.
What happens when you adopt a track dog? I mean, what's their demeanor like? How old are they typically when they retire them for adoption?
It really varies. Sometimes you get a dog that's like, what'll happen is they won't race them till, I forget now exactly, but it's like, say they're 18 months. And then if they're skittish, usually one of both ways. If the dog seems like it's skittish on the track, it's not a huge investment like a horse. So they'll just they'll get rid of it. They'll put it up for adoption. And if they have a deal going with like one of these rescue centers, that's best case scenario for a dog. So you might get one that young. In our case, Kirby was 4.5 years old when we adopted her, and she had been a good runner. And they all have, so she was now retired. 4.5, they slowed down just a millisecond, and that's really all it takes in greyhound racing. And they're all different dispositions. She was pretty badly traumatized. I don't know, of course you can't ask her how she was treated. She was pretty badly scarred up. She had scars all over her.
A lot of miles on her.
A lot, and who knows what the scars were from. You never know. You just don't know. When we first got her, it's funny because somebody had adopted her and returned her, and she was the sweetest animal in the world, but she was very, very scared of everything at first. And the one advantage we had was because I don't know how long these people had her. She knew how to do things that a lot of dogs, typically, like if you have a puppy and you have a car, it learns to jump in the car. And these dogs don't know any of that stuff.
Right.
So, but she did. She must have, so she probably was owned by someone for some length of time. I'd say probably at least maybe, let's say 6 months. So she knew right away to jump in the back of the SUV when we got her.
She had a life before racing.
Yeah, or after racing, I think it was probably.
Oh, I see.
She was returned to the rescue center.
Ah.
And why they returned her, I don't know. They don't tell you because obviously they want you to take her. I mean, she was gentle. I think that they just had second thoughts. But she ended up being great. I mean, one of the things they always tell you not to do with a greyhound, and I understand why, is they tell you never, ever walk them off a leash. Don't do it. And because they'll chase after a squirrel or...
and if they take off, there's no chance you're going to catch them.
There's no chance. I mean, it's it. So, of course...
I'm not discounting your wheels, man. I'm just saying.
I'm telling you, yeah. And I'd had her for 2 years. And our house in Maine backs on a hill. And there's really no place you can go when I'm down that hill. There's within 50 feet of the bottom of the hill, there's the river. There's woods on one side, thick, overgrown woods, and the other side was this guy's property. She couldn't have gone too far. So I figured I'm just gonna give it a go. And I let her off the leash. She ran they're used to running in a circular pattern on the track. So she ran the circle and she loved it. She looked like, it was like freedom. So over a period of about 6 months, I would do that a little bit more. And then I began taking her to this, across the street from us, there was a large parking area that was not in use. There was a healthcare center that had closed. So I would go there at 5 o'clock in the morning, let her off the leash, and she would just run. And I never, if I told a greyhound rescue person this, they would string me up, but she was great. And, I never had a problem. When I called her, she came and she stopped. She didn't chase after any animals. The only thing that she had a tendency to do, which is funny, was she liked cats. And so when we'd be walking, she would, I have 3 cats, but 2 of them were cats that I found with Kirby. She would just take a liking to them and they'd start hanging out. They'd start following us like the Pied Piper.
Wow.
But they're different. You have to be very patient, especially early on. But they're the gentlest, sweetest dogs. I like dogs, cats. I've had a number of different dogs, but they're great. And you kind of you do feel good about it because otherwise, they've got no life.
Yeah, that is something. I'm just like they're not built for winter. I grew up in California, so when I'm talking to a guy who, wrote a book about the Pathfinders of the 101st Airborne, I'm reluctant to say things like it's 52 and I'm freezing.
Now, as I said, I'm very familiar with these conversations.
Yeah. So we do want to mention your book. We want to promote your book, First to Jump, and it's terrific, man. How long's it been out?
Not long. I think it went on sale December 2nd, first week of December.
Wow.
So about a month.
8 or 9 times you've been on the New York Times bestseller list for your 30 books. That's pretty damn impressive.
I'm happy about it.
Yeah, it's definitely. I wonder though, and I'm not sure exactly how they determine what the New York Times bestseller criteria is, but you are clearly a New Yorker. You've got New York sensibility. Do you think that matters?
No, because I've never actually gone about looking at
how they determine it all.
Yeah, exactly. But it's really based on sales. That's all it is. It's just based on sales. And actually, It's interesting that I was a service called Nielsen Book Scan.
Okay.
These are the same Nielsen people who measure TV ratings.
TV ratings, right?
And it costs a small fortune to actually have a subscription to it. So most individual writers don't have it. Usually agents and the publishers have it.
Right.
Amazon has a feature called Author Central, which is you sign up if you're an author and you've got to get verified and all this stuff. In the last year, they've actually been providing authors with some of the raw Nielsen book scan data. It's not as comprehensive as if you were a member, but it essentially tells you how many. I think it's good for about 60 to 70% of sales per week. And the reason I say the percentage is because not all book scan bases its numbers on point of sale. So it's actually whatever's rung up goes into their system.
Okay.
At particular stores, and this would be major stores, Barnes and Noble,
right,
Dalton's, those, and I think Amazon, though I'm not positive, but a lot of the indies, a lot of the smaller stores,
they don't count.
They don't count in terms of book scan, which is a very bad thing, and that's a whole nother subject.
Sure it is. I do want to explore that subject, though, because we've had authors on, Jim DeFelice, who, introduced us to you. We touched on this off air, but it's worth saying. And the reason that I brought up your New York sensibility feeding into the New York Times stats it is based on sales. But we recently had an author named Teresa Rodriguez on our show, and she kills on Amazon. But she's not a New York Times bestseller. And we asked her, well, why do you think that is? And she said, well, I think that the New York Times bestseller list has to do with specific demographics around New York, and that's just not my demo. So I don't mind that that's not where I am, and I'm not touted in that periodical because that's not her audience specifically. Mm-hmm. However, your book is, it's about a bunch of rough and tumble guys. So a bunch of rough and tumble guys are going to be your readers, or in Pete's case, a bunch of rough and tumble guy. And in my case, a guy who wishes he was rough and tumble and never served. But, I think that if I'm to speculate such things, I would imagine that you would just do better in that audience because you speak in a tone and in a way that appeals to, dudes. I mean,
it's interesting though. When I looked at one thing that's kind of neat is when you check out these figures, they have you can call up an interactive map, and that really tells you, again, within 70%, how many copies you've sold in a particular area.
Right.
And what was really interesting is that, so thus far, the number one city by far in terms of how many copies of the book I'm selling is Boston.
It's Boston. Okay.
And New York is it's not really a close second. I forget what the exact numbers were, but it's significantly behind that, and then Philly. And then what really becomes interesting is you start looking at places like Chicago, and it's not really moving there, but you look at a place like Portland, Oregon, and it is moving there.
Wow.
And who knows why, although I do know that a lot of Navy people from past experience and other books I've written,
sure,
there are a whole lot of Navy people who settled there on the West Coast in those northwestern states.
Yeah.
And maybe maybe you've got a lot of people there who like military
and just masculine in general,
and just overall, yeah.
They got beards.
They climb trees and shit.
Yeah. So it's hard to tell, really hard to know, and you try to figure it out,
right?
But you don't know.
When you well, first let me ask you this: is the book doing well in Kentucky, home of the 101st, or is it doing well in North Carolina, where the 82nd Airborne is?
Great question. Thus far, it sold very few copies in both places. And I thought for sure that in Kentucky, it was going to really do well.
Right.
Now, one issue in publishing that may impact that, and I think I'll have a little bit more, at least unscientific firsthand data, which to me is sometimes pretty good, in a few weeks. And that is, first, it's really difficult to get books reviewed nowadays. And different regional newspapers don't do a lot of book reviews. And if they do, you would think, for example, that the major papers in Louisville or wherever would review a book like this because of their demographic.
Sure.
And yet it wasn't reviewed over there. So how do people there know the book is out? Well, either hopefully somebody will catch an interview here, or I did a couple of others. But if they don't do it, it's really, really hard. Their bookstores are fewer and further between nowadays. That's, the independent bookstore long been on the decline. So how does awareness of the book filter out there if there's no radio station picking up an interview, if there's no newspaper doing a story? That may be a reason that you don't see more sales there. On February 11th, I'm actually going to be at Fort Knox,
right,
at a great library called the Bar Library, which is on base, and also I'm going to be doing a lunch at a nearby Wounded Warrior facility. So I'm interested in seeing whether that can kind of jog or spread awareness of the book in those areas, because I would think those would be prime areas. And yet, again, it's so far doesn't appear to be the case.
Maybe we can get the show up in time to just precede that too, and see how social media helps push people towards that. We can hashtag 101st, all those kind of things. And,
would be great.
Yeah.
Just to I won't monopolize this, but yesterday I was music is one of my interests, and I was on YouTube looking at an interview by a guy named Ian Hunter, rock musician who's been around for quite a while. And the interview was done at a small record store, and actually had vinyl records in Washington, D.C. And I was looking at the store, and there was a time when here in New York and in every city there were many, many stores like that. Now in New York, I can't think of one, not even small stores. There may be one or two, but I don't know of any anymore. And I thought about the days when you would go into a record store, for example, and if you liked Frank Sinatra or the Rolling Stones or whoever, you went over to the bin, and maybe you'd heard the 45 on the radio. Maybe you'd heard a friend of yours had one album. Maybe there was a big hit album, Rolling Stones, Sticky Fingers, and you went to the bin, and wow, here's 30 other albums by the Rolling Stones, and you try them out.
And you could go in the listening booth.
Go into listening booths, or sometimes ask. I actually worked in a record store. You go to I managed one back in the day. So can you play a cut off this? It's really similar with books. If people can't go into a bookstore and can't actually look at the shelves and see, wow, what's out here, it becomes, how do you browse?
Right.
It's a different thing, and there are obviously some really positive aspects to online merchandising,
but it's drastically altered the browsing process.
Yeah,
it really has. Yeah,
you remember really being young, and Tower was open till midnight. So if you had nothing else to do, but you had a car, you can go to Tower and shop and learn what was cool. And I mean, how many times you go to a record store and you forget, oh man, what was that record I was going to go buy? And it just totally escapes you. And then you just start exploring.
And that was okay, because you could dig around. Yeah,
exactly. All the time. That happened. That was just the overall, that's what you did.
Yeah.
And even with books as a kid, when I started reading, in those days, you'd have, where I grew up, which was in Brooklyn, New York, and it was all over though. We had what we called candy stores that I guess would now be newsstands, but we had the candy store that had magazines and a paperback rack, or the card shop that had shelves of paperbacks. And in those days, and again, this is a whole subject, but the publishing business was very, very different. You had local distributors that were called rack jobbers, and these guys would basically, the guy would take his truck from the warehouse, he'd go to the store, he'd go to the storekeeper, and he'd say, so what's selling? And the guy'd say, well, my Louis L'Amour westerns are going like hotcakes, and my Isaac Asimov science fiction novels are flying out. And next thing you know, the guy'd say, next week I'll bring you a bunch more. And that's how they bought. So that's how they had these books on the shelves. So there was kind of like this almost, you didn't need computers to tell you what the local demographic was.
They had the rack jobber, and he lived 2 towns away at the most.
Right, exactly. If you were, 11, 12 years old and you discovered books, Saturdays I would get a couple of bucks from my parents and walk to the local place. And again, I'd stand there and browse. And if I saw this great Conan the Barbarian cover, man, I got Frank Frazetta, Conan the Barbarian, or Lord of the Rings, the Wizard on the cover, Gandalf on the cover. These things captivate you and make you read. And again, I mean, there are great things. I don't want to be a Luddite here. I think there's great having here in New York. I don't know about in the San Francisco area, but or you're not you're outside Frisco, right?
Yeah, but close by.
Yeah, we're in the area.
So right here, I mean, Barnes and Noble, you can order a book at 8 a.m. and by like noon they'll deliver it online, and it's that fast.
It's tough to compete with that.
It's really hard, and it's a really neat thing to have that. And I've taken advantage where I'm might be researching something and I come across a book and think, wow, man, I really need this, and boom, it's here. I like that aspect of it and other stuff, and then with your other guest too, the thing I also wonder as far as Amazon is if I don't know, I don't know if she, I don't know if her sales are primarily ebooks, and if they are, I have no clue how ebooks are measured, factor into that New York Times equation. Ebooks are a huge mystery. They don't, even in this particular book scan thing I'm telling you about,
they don't track ebooks.
They don't track ebooks. So the only time you find out about that is when you get your royalty statements, and that'll tell you what the ebook sales were.
Huh.
And you have to hope they're accurate, of course, but that's when you find out about ebooks. So I don't know where that kind of enters into that New York Times best-selling mix. I have no clue.
I would say that it makes it, I mean, the picture that you paint, which absolutely sounds accurate, makes it so that somebody getting on the New York Times bestseller list, you really have to kick some ass to get on that list, because there's a lot of unknown there, and there's a lot of unknown that's trending. I mean, my wife, she has an e-reader, and that's all she reads anymore. She hasn't had a book in her hand in probably several months.
Yeah.
So how many people are there like that? And I would argue a whole bunch.
Oh, and I do that a lot now. I still love, I mean, to me, there's nothing like physical book and having the paper and feel of the paper.
The way that the paper smells
all that. I use, my e-reader for research. It's a great thing.
Yep.
Because I can instead of, if I'm looking for material, say some information on World War II, maybe I, in the past would have had to go to a used bookstore and hope it was there and try to order it or get it online and have tons of research books stacked around me. I can often find them as ebooks and have it all on my, I have a Kindle and just use the Kindle, and it's a great tool. And I've come to use it quite a bit in that way.
Well, that's clear, because when you look at First to Jump, the bibliography at the end of that thing,
it's enormous.
Yeah. It's huge. So, I can see you digging around, and I could see the advantage of the Kindle and being able to just, jump from one thing to the next and have related materials,
and carry it with you.
Right.
Yeah.
If you're gonna.
Yeah, I used to travel back and forth, get on the bird to get from Iraq to here and back. And, you got to take, I'm always reading 3 books. And then you got, if I finish, I might need to bring this one. Oh, and you know what? I've been meaning to get, so next thing you know, you got 5 books in your backpack. And that's a ton of weight.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, it was a lot. I loved having a Kindle in my backpack so I could have 25 books at my fingertips. And I read a lot more because of that.
Yeah.
Hey, with that bibliography, I'm curious. The fact that you can write well enough to sell novels is already incredible, and let's not shortchange that. But how do you sort out all of that information? I mean, are you reading the entire article? So there's 150 references in this book, and you're obviously picking certain things out. How do you organize that? How do you get all of that information into a workable piece?
That's a great question. I don't even know how to answer. Let me back up a little into the process of writing some of the fiction I've done. I've written a lot of I guess you could call them techno thrillers. I just prefer to call them thrillers. I wrote 8 books in a series called Tom Clancy's Power Plays, and these were big fat books, and they were very Clancy. Yes, they weren't exactly like a book that Clancy would have done, but they were, obviously they were in that overall genre. Anyway, in doing those kinds of books, there was a ton of research involved. Locales, weapons, fighting weapons and more weapons, combat tactics, strategy, on and on and on, global politics. So,
well, these are, first of all, it's a series that's created by Tom Clancy. If you're going to take the torch. You have to get it right, because the readers of that series are going to have some technical knowledge. They're going to have some, their reading history is going to have informed them, and you got to get those details right.
Exactly. And you really, you got to get it right anyway. I mean, if you're writing a particular scene and it's in a part of the world that maybe you haven't been to, and there's a lot of places I haven't been to, you really need to learn your trade and know how to make it convincing.
Right.
So,
and often the landscape becomes a character almost. I mean,
absolutely. Oh, and in fact, that's really true, because what happens is you'll find a feature of the landscape and think, I can have a cool action scene. Really, really, really frequently, that happens. Often the weapon itself dictates an action scene. You find a cool weapon, you think you want to use it, so you figure out how you're going to use it, or a vehicle, or several vehicles. So that's really true. So what happens is, in writing those novels, it became an ongoing thing. I just got really good at researching, on the fly. And that really came to serve me well in doing nonfiction. When I begin the book, before I've written a word, obviously I've done a extensive research, but there's never a day really that goes by. I would have to say that I don't come on something that I think I got to double check this, or I better look this up, or maybe it's just something I start wondering about in a particular scene in a book like First to Jump. So I'll stop and do the research, whether I have to get an archival paper, try to talk to somebody, whatever it is, you just do it. And the process of kind of like folding all of that stuff into the narrative, I honestly can't tell you that there is a process other than, at this point, it's almost intuitive. It's all one to me. I know where I'm going. I know what I'm trying to get to in terms of telling the overall story. And
you can almost smell the nuggets that are going to be useful.
Exactly. And often, something will come up and it'll be, wow, you're reading one thing, you're researching one thing, and as you say, a nugget will come up and you think, this is great. So you explore it further, and it's just, you could almost chart it as a tree type diagram where one thing leads to another.
Sure.
And that really is as exhausting as the actual writing of the book. I find that the hardest part, not the hardest, but the most exhausting. I just use my own word. It takes a lot of energy and a lot of time to do that, but that's what it's all about.
And it comes through in the end product.
Yeah, you hope so. Yeah. I mean, to me, I'm proud of that. I really try to, I actually hired a researcher once, and he kept coming in to ask me questions. And I thought, well, why?
What the hell did I get you in here for? I could ask myself these questions.
Exactly. I could be doing the same thing and saving a few bucks.
Well, I'll tell you what, I can say this, having started First to Jump, I'm behind. Pete's read the book, and I've, and I haven't finished it yet, but as I'm getting further and further into it, what is absolutely apparent, you dug in deep. Because I know you didn't live through World War II, and you certainly didn't live through the story that you tell of the Pathfinders. The writing just pulls you in, and you absolutely are surrounded, in every sense of your imagination by all the small details.
Thanks a lot. I tried.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You go ahead.
I was going to say that with this book, the thing I really set out to do with this was I wanted it to be narrative, and the reason I'm kind of stammering is because all my books are narrative. In other words, they're written like novels, or at least using novelistic techniques. In this one in particular, I really wanted it to roll. I wanted it to have as little exposition as I could, and just kind of like roll with what was happening to these paratroopers from the minute they jumped, and then on through their experiences in the war. In that sense, I wanted it to be immersive. I wanted to get that what they used to call, what they called, if you've ever read Ernie Pyle's great
Yes.
World War II,
Yeah.
That worm's eye view of fighting men. I am a huge fan of Ernie Pyle's work, and I wanted to, if I could, capture a little bit of that in First to Jump.
Man, I think you did. And going back a little bit in time, what we talked about, and getting right back to that, it is impressive that you've done. Stephen Ambrose was good at this as well too. You've taken this very wide topic, people coming in from all sorts of different units, and putting it like you feel like, okay, you're in the plane, and then you scoot over to another plane in another serial, and those guys are there, and there's a timeliness. You're able to sort out a lot of chaos because none of those guys know each other's story very well, and you're able to get into the detail and clarify things that are wildly chaotic. I mean, one of the reasons why there was such concern for these missions is you just don't know what's going to happen. What if everybody breaks their ankle in one serial?
Right. And
what happens?
Yeah. And that was kind of like, that is another one of the difficult things to do because of there's so much going on at once and trying to sort out these timelines. And yet sometimes when you kind of figure something out and you think, wow, this guy thought he was here, but he couldn't have been there. He had to be there. And then you kind of double check it and triple check it, which happened in one case in this book. And then it kind of leads you to, wow, that's why he's saying, and then suddenly his whole story, because you've heard, in this guy's case, I'd heard a long interview with him, that was, I think it was in a museum's archive. And I thought, now it all makes sense. And when you can put that together, it's like, that's
you're waist deep in it at that point.
Yeah. And you really feel like it's an accomplishment because I feel like I've put the story down. This is what happened.
Yeah.
That's a good feeling. I like that. I did the same thing. I wrote one of my previous books, codenamed Caesar. That even more so because I don't want to get into that too much, but it was about a submarine, a German submarine near the end of the war. The first submarine and the only so far, at least documented, that was engaged, that was sunk in a sub-to-sub battle. It happened off the coast of Norway, but there was a lot of Discovery Channel documentary about it, and years ago, and there's been a lot of there's some newspaper stories written about it. It never made sense because in that story, as represented, the British submarine that sunk the German sub was notified by they got notified by an ultra intercept. In other words, something was decoded in England and it was quickly radioed to them, which was not what happened. It couldn't. In other words, the time frame always given is like within an hour, boom, and that wasn't the way things happened in World War II. It took days. Even at the end of the war, when things had sped up, it would have taken days for them to get the kind of intelligence that was needed to locate this German sub. So then I had to try to figure out, well, what was it? Because this story doesn't make sense. And then I kind of stumbled upon what was going on with the Norwegian underground, and they were really engaged in a lot of acts of espionage, and they had hooked up with British intelligence and were trained by them. A lot, when I started to really get into that research, it all came together for me. Until that point, it made no sense.
So they really did, really were able to speed the process of getting intelligence.
Yeah, because what happened was at one point the Brits submarines were based near the Shetland Islands. They were ferrying members of the Norwegian underground back and forth aboard submarines. And they would equip them. They would give them radios, and these people were known as coast watchers. And you had them in different places throughout World War II. And the Norwegian underground would actually watch the coast, and they would observe submarines, ship traffic. They would also, a lot of them were conscripted as slave workers by the Germans at the different coastal facilities. They were building submarine bunkers. They were building docks. They were doing all sorts of work. At the same time, they were spying on what was going on, and this was being passed on to the British. So they were able to combine, the ultra data with on the spot intelligence. Absolutely, that was really, really important, especially in that part of the world, in that theater. It was really, really a big deal.
Yeah, that's terrific. That is a really noteworthy thing, too, as far as being able to understand the importance of those ally relationships and to take guys who were seemingly insignificant, who were really subversively able to document things and understand the espionage process and the intelligence processes and make a huge difference.
If you like the show,
And you know you do,
send us some pictures of your movies.
don't do that. Support the show.
There are 3 ways you can support us.
Number 1, go to iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you listen to podcasts.
And leave a 5-star rating and review.
It helps with the show metrics and helps us get better placement. Number 2,
Visit our website.
www.breakitdownshow.com.
We've got an Amazon and an eBay link.
Same Amazon, same eBay, you know and love, but they give us a little kickback when you get to their site from ours. And number 3, leave comments about the shows that you like. We want to know what you think, how you feel.
Tell us how to make the show better. We greatly appreciate it.
Now back to the show.
We like boobies.
Another thing I'd add about that is that they were, of course, they lived there. They were they were citizens of a conquered nation, and the German reprisals were brutal. If they would find out that a family member was if they suspected you of being a member of the underground,
Right.
they would wipe out your family. They would raise a town.
Sure.
So these people were
At the
were
very
heroes.
least, wipe out your family and parade their carcasses through the streets.
Exactly. So, when you look at even like in First to Jump, there's a little bit about during the Operation Market Garden, the invasion of Holland. I write a little bit about what the Dutch underground was doing, and it was of course the same thing there. And when you can bring that to light, it is exactly what you say. It's a great feeling because these people were really brave.
Crucial.
They were crucial and they were heroes. And people don't as often, sometimes especially in America, we don't realize the kind of risk that some of the locals who are helping our guys out are taking on. It's nice to be able to give them credit.
It's gotten easy to make fun of the French. That's one of the things that we lose sight of, is the amount of bravery that it takes to be involved and to, have an underground movement and nurture that kind of thing. So to take a summary break for our listeners, we were lucky enough today to have Jerome Preisler, whose book First to Jump is what we're really excited about, but we're also talking about Codename Caesar. We want to be the record store where everybody looks and gets excited about, an act, and that act is Jerome Preisler today.
Yeah. Hey, Jerome, how did you come across the First to Jump story? I mean, so many World War II stories have already been told. There's obviously tons of great ones left, but how does it last long enough to get to you, and how did you find it?
That's a question that I can't answer, and I'm just happy that nobody else did. I read. Obviously, it's a great interest of mine, so I read a lot of World War II material, and I knew about the Pathfinders. It actually just dawned on me that I hadn't seen anything about them other than a half a chapter here, 2 pages there, and I thought, well, what I really did was I started Googling and I started looking on Amazon and I started doing my own browsing, and I started to realize nothing has been written, and that amazed me. I think I even did a couple of searches because I thought, that's got to be wrong. I got to be mistaken.
Yeah.
And all the material that's been written, Band of Brothers, all this stuff about and there's been, these are great books. There's a guy, George, and I know I'm going to blow his name, Kasimaki. It's a Polish name, and he's an excellent writer of oral histories, and he wrote several books that I use extensively for background information in writing First to Jump, and yet there was not much about the Pathfinders. So I thought, wow, let's see if I can do something here. So that's when I started doing my own research, and from there it's a matter of write up a proposal and so on. But it was really, and it often is just like that. I'm kind of like, as a writer, I'm always looking for something new to write about. I realize that you think everything's been told, and yet you find that it hasn't. And I've been lucky enough to stumble on some of these subjects, and this was one. And this one totally blew my mind. I was totally surprised.
Well, I'm glad you found it too. And in my imagination, what happens in my imagination, because this story is so good, is that there were authors who came before you who thought, I'm going to save this one's going to be my swan song. I'm going to pack this one away. Just everybody wait. because when I unleash this one, it's going to be terrific. And then they died.
But it may be. Or maybe, maybe people just don't see it in a story. Yes, it could be one or the other or both.
Yeah.
Maybe sometimes people see a story and they don't really
see what's the compelling part of that story.
Yeah, who knows? Sometimes what'll happen is when I start researching, what really will grab me is some obscure story written in a local, Syracuse, New York newspaper about one of the paratroopers who's from that town or a nearby hometown, whose hometown is nearby, and I read a little bit about him or his wife, and it's a story from it's a newspaper clip from 1944, and I think that's the kind of thing that just grabs me, because I think I want to find out what the deal is with this guy. What was his story?
Right.
Can I find out? And maybe it's a little bit of serendipity. Maybe it's all those things. I don't know.
Well, you know what? I want to shift gears for a minute, because there's all kinds of fascinating stuff about you, man. I'm a San Francisco Giants fan. Lifelong, through and through.
Uh-oh. Here we go.
There you go.
The good news about that, there's two pieces of good news about that. I
actually like the Giants.
Well, see, that's the thing, is that we know your association is with the Yankees, and I get to like the Yankees because you guys are in the AL. So I mentioned that just so you know where my loyalty lies. But honestly, my secondary loyalty is to the Yankees for two reasons. Number one, both my sons played baseball through high school. I have a son who's a senior in high school now, and just was on a sports show earlier this week that talked about high school baseball, and the guy whose show it was, a friend of ours named Tim Fitzgerald, asked him, what player do you emulate? And my son is a catcher. But he said, I don't emulate a particular player for physical reasons, but I love Derek Jeter. Just because.
And I knew you were going to say that.
He's he's done everything the right way. Everybody knows that he played the game properly. Everybody was in on the send-off because he was just the stand-up kind of baseball player. And he did all the stuff right. Aside from that, I grew up in Vallejo, California, where CeCe Sabathia is from.
Ah, there you go.
And I also share a birthday with Mariano Rivera.
Oh boy.
So I'll go on the record as saying, second to the Giants, I do love the Yankees.
Actually, that's a good point of honor there.
Yeah.
Sharing Rivera's birthday.
Oh yeah, believe you me.
I wouldn't mind that.
Well, there's a plus and a minus to that. We were actually born on the same day.
No kidding.
Yeah. So it's not just that, he's not older than I am. And I bring that up because I look at Mariano Rivera's wonderful career and I think, Jesus, when am I going to get any fucking thing done? But
one day when I was doing, I haven't done the baseball stuff in a little while, but when I was doing the baseball stuff, I was standing outside the Yankee dugout during batting practice. Rivera was approaching a milestone. This was, I think, I forget what year it was, probably 2011, maybe 12. Anyway, it was a number of saves, and the number passes me by at the moment. He loved to go shag balls. He always secretly wanted to play center field, and he was always out. In fact, that's how he got injured.
Right. Yeah.
Right. He was jogging out there, and he jogged past me, and I was standing with a couple of guys, one of my pals, and then an older gentleman who was a reporter for one of the Spanish language newspapers or maybe the radio. It doesn't matter as far as the story goes. And he was, I would guess, in his late 60s, early 70s, white haired, big white mustache. And I remember him standing next to me. As Rivera was running by, they exchanged a couple of words. They were speaking in Spanish, and Rivera kept running, and this gent turns to me and he goes, "Un caballero," meaning, of course, a gentleman. And it was perfect. I actually wrote a column where I used that because it was just so descriptive of Rivera. It was kind of a neat moment that really encapsulates what he and somebody like Jeter as well. I did a baseball podcast maybe a month ago with a couple of buddies who are actually Red Sox fans, and they're up in New England. They asked me, "Can you tell me anything about, from all your years working with the Yankees, can you tell me anything about Jeter that
dish out some dirt?"
People, Yeah, or any, and I said, I can't. I said, because what you see is what you get with this guy.
Right.
It's what you would see in the clubhouse, what you would see. This was Jeter. There's really nothing, there's nothing more than what you've all seen. And what you've all seen is obvious, is what what you just expressed. The guy he comported himself perfectly. He was on the field, off the field, his personal life was kept personal. He never made a fool of himself. He played all the time. He played hurt. He played, he played through all sorts of injuries, and he was clutch. I mean, what more do you want from a good teammate? So what more do you want?
Well,
what more do you want from?
I'm glad you say that because, I don't know any more than anybody else. So to have somebody with the inside picture really say, yes, there's absolutely a reason that everybody feels that way about him. And it's because you can't fake that for that long.
No,
not in New York.
Right.
No, I was going to say not in New York because you're constantly, a lot of the players that would come from smaller market teams. The big point of adjustment, or one of them would be, when after a game, if it was particularly if it's a loss, and particularly if during that loss that player either had some role in the loss, botched a play or struck out in a key moment or something like that, and they would really overwhelmed by the number of reporters and the intensity of what was going on in the clubhouse. There was one guy, Rafael Soriano. He came in as he actually when Rivera was hurt for a while, he closed for a while, and he came in as the and he had quite a resume. He had been great with the Seattle Mariners. He'd been great with, I think he was with the Braves after that. I'm almost sure. And the Yankees signed him for a 3-year deal, big money deal. Plus he had an opt-out clause, which was kind of questionable. But anyway, for the year he was with the Yankees, he actually ended up doing a great job. But he had a hard time adjusting it. And I remember his first couple of months, April, May, he was giving up home runs at the worst possible moments, and the Yankees would have a 2-1 lead, and he'd come in the 8th inning and give up 2 runs, so the Yankees would end up losing by a run. But it got to a point where New Yorkers were really down on him, and he was catching it from the crowd, and
right. New
New York media was all over this guy. And I remember going into the clubhouse, and again, fortunately, I wasn't a reporter. I was I approached it the same way I approach my book writing. So I was writing about, I was lucky. I could write about whatever I wanted to write about and turn it in whenever I wanted to. I didn't have to do a column on any given night, week. It was all up to me. And I went into the clubhouse, and this guy had come out of the shower, and he was stark naked. And a lot of the guys who've been around, like somebody like Jeter, he's always going to get dressed in that off limits room, where in the training rooms there. So he's never going to come out. He's going to come out and he's got
the system down.
Yeah. These guys know it, but this guy, he didn't. And there he was, and the guy stark naked in his trying to get dressed, and he'd just given up a game. Either he'd blown a save or blown or given up the game in the 8th inning. Here are the TV cameras and all these reporters, and of course it's men and women in a contemporary clubhouse, and they're all just standing around this guy as he's trying to put his pants on. And I thought there was something about it that made me uncomfortable. And he couldn't handle it. It took him a long time to handle it. But I remember standing in that group and telling myself, it was odd because I said to myself, I don't want him to see me with these people. I don't want him to see me in this group. I don't want him to associate me with this
these
group
assholes.
Yeah, exactly. And there were a couple. There was actually one woman who, I won't name her, but she was a TV reporter, and she actually turned to the cameraman and said, can you give him some time? And can you turn the lights off the guy? To her credit. Yeah. But most of them were not like that. So, I mean, when a player comes into New York, it's a big deal. I'm sorry, I got
that spotlight's bright.
Here. No, that's a great thing to bring up, because here the other guy is trying to deal with it, and he can't even put his damn pants on without having someone jam a microphone in his face. And
somewhere.
Yeah, that doesn't go to
somewhere, right?
The class of the organization. That's not what that's not there's a reason why Jeter doesn't do that. He doesn't want to be put in that situation.
Right.
I wanted to say too about the Yankees. I'm an admirer of the Yankees as a person who appreciates baseball and has been a fan of a number of teams. The baseball standard for the Yankees is to win the World Championship, and money is not an object. That's not part of the equation. We will spend the money to win the championship.
And some people get pissed off about that.
Yeah.
And so, okay, great. If you're from Milwaukee, whatever, get pissed off about that. But the fact of the matter is, there is something truly admirable about knowing for 100 years, more than 100 years,
right,
we're out to win a championship.
Yeah, we're going to win this. And we're in New York, so let's not make money a concern here. Let's do it smart.
Right.
So as a fan, you know that, yes, they're going to charge more for tickets, but they're going to put on the field the best possible team. You're not going to hear like the Twins owner, Carl Pohlad, who's passed now, but he was a billionaire.
Mm-hmm.
He made billions by foreclosing on farms of the people that supported his team.
I didn't even know that. He's one of the richest men in the country.
Right. And that's how he got, that's part of the way he got rich, but he wouldn't put money into the team. And so, those fans, your guys' fans don't have that problem. The money will go into the team. Steinbrenner's got the biggest monument out there, Monument Park, because he was the brand. He made them what they are,
Well, although that model may be changing. It's shown some signs of changing the past two seasons and, the past two off seasons. Last year they spent, but this year they didn't. The year before that they didn't. It looks like they may be cutting back, and it's going to be interesting to see how Yankee fans react this year if the team starts faltering early on, and they might because they're really in transition right now. So
we're also grossly oversimplifying what the Yankee model is, but I mean, more than anything, every other team, really could take note from the fact that sometimes you got to be out to win, and make that be the first thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I really loved that about Steinbrenner. And he had it, and the man had many, many faults, but to me, there's no particular virtue in a team that succeeds but with draft picks and a farm system, as opposed to a team that makes wise financial signings, free agent signings. To me, it's one and the same. I mean, if you can. They're both equally valid ways of doing things. I'm not an owner of the Yankees, so their books aren't my business. I'm not, because a lot of fans who say, we want a homegrown team. There are a lot of Yankee fans who say that.
Right. And
to me, yeah, it's nice. It's nice to be able to follow a kid through his whole career, from the time he's in the minors till when he's brought up, and then hopefully if he stays with the team, which rarely happens anymore, through his career, like a guy like Jeter, you've seen the whole arc of his career, and it's a lot a lot of fun.
It does make for a neat story. I mean, we have a hometown kid of sorts here on the Giants, Brandon Crawford, who grew up here in the Bay Area, and his parents were Giants season ticket holders at Candlestick, and there are all kinds of pictures of him as a 10-year-old hanging out at the Stick with a Giants cap on, and that is really, really neat. And if anybody has a chance of being able to do that just for sheer population size, of course it's New York, but they wield a championship team. And sometimes you got to reach out. Sometimes you got to reach out to Dominican Republic or Venezuela or wherever you can get the best guy to play this position in the world. So, I'm going to leave you with this comment, and then I'm going to open it up so you can make whatever closing comments you'd like. I want to close with my New York story, which was, I grew up not only in California, but in Northern California. So that makes me doubly soft. So when I went to New York, I visited New York the first time when I was about, I must have been about 12 years old. And my dad brought us out there. He was working out there for a couple of weeks and was able to bring us for a long weekend to hang out with him, and we did that. But the first night that I was there, he brought us into a pizza shop to get a slice, and I got up to the counter. It was my turn, and the guy looked at me and said, "What do you want?" And I grew up in the land of, "How may I help you?" But this guy he looked at me, and he had a mustache, and he said, "What do you want?" And I froze, and I looked at him because I thought he was mad at me. And my dad nudged me with his elbow, and, in the dad way that comforted everything, he said, The man wants to know what you want. And I thought, oh, that's how this works. And I got my pepperoni slice and I was happy. And it made me really, that one transaction helped me to understand what I know of New York, which is you want it, you ask for it. And when somebody wants something of you, they ask for it.
Mm.
So there you are.
There you go.
I'm going to tell my New York story. So I went to a Yankees game in the old Yankee Stadium. The Cubs happened to be in town. At the time, I had a pretty close affinity for the Cubs because I was living in Chicago. I just moved out. And so they had come to play each other for the first time since like the 32 World Series or whatever that.
Oh, was this like 2005?
That sounds about right. Yeah.
I was at those games.
Yeah. Well, Derek Jeter hit a grand slam. His first grand slam.
Yeah, I was at that game. It was a Sunday afternoon, I think.
Well,
Military Appreciation Day or something.
Yeah.
My memories go, yeah.
Well, that sounds about right because I was there. I wasn't in the military. I was working as a contract intel guy, but I was kept back home for vacation, and I said, "Oh, I'm going to go to New York. I'm going to go check out the Yankee Stadium." Because I've been to a lot of stadiums. It's one of the things I do. Yeah, Jeter hits that grand slam for his first career grand slam, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to buy that man's jersey. So I went down, because you're impressed by how he did it. Back in like 95 when they won the championship, everybody said, this team is a team with no Hall of Famers and what a team. No, bullshit. That was never even close to right. Jeter always had that trend towards Hall of Fame. Mariano Rivera was on that team. Bernie Williams is maybe not quite a Hall of Famer, but certainly a good conversation about it. So, I was always impressed by those core players that did that.
Yeah,
And what the fans do at Yankee Stadium and Bob Shepard. How do you not love Bob Shepard?
Yeah.
Oh man, and the old stadium can't be beat. Just anecdotally, I'll tell you very quickly. That day there was an elderly gentleman who was signing autographs. I was there as a fan. I was sitting in the stands, and there was a guy signing autographs, and he was kind of making his way around. And I'm looking at him. I'm thinking, this guy looks familiar. This guy looks familiar. He was wearing a Cubs jersey. This guy just ends up, he's Ernie Banks.
Oh,
and he was just, I don't know what he was doing, just walking around the stands. I don't know if he was making his way somewhere. He was just standing there signing autographs right in front of me. And I thought, this is really cool, and just talking to people. And that was that day. That was the day Jeter hit the grand slam.
I sat on the first base side. Were you kind of near me or were you somewhere else in the stadium?
I was actually, if I recall correctly, I think I was in the third base side that day, if I recall correctly. And my memory's pretty good, so I think I was, because it was really hot that day. And the third base side was always hot. I remember, so.
Well, that's pretty cool.
Well, we can assume that at some point, now that we know that you guys have been in the same room together. I mean, that
same stadium.
That was a big room.
Yeah. That's
but
a big
you guys
joint.
have been in the same room together.
Yeah.
That, hopefully the next time, we find ourselves in the same room, we have a drink in our hand and, we have some time to kill, and because we'd love to hear your stories. But, I want to just say, thank you. We appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you for having me, and I hope I didn't ramble too much.
No, you did great.
No, we love it, man.
So, if you want to support Jerome, get his book, First to Jump. We'll have the link up next to the show so you can jump right into Amazon and buy it right there. Know that the book is excellent. Are the movie rights already acquired? Is it moving forward on that track at all, Jerome?
No, but hopefully, if anyone's listening, then I'd be more than happy to accept any inquiries.
Yeah.
In all seriousness, I do want to say about this book, I'm as proud of it as I am of anything I've written. Maybe more proud than anything. To me, as I say in my intro, and it was very heartfelt. It was a real privilege to be able to tell these men's stories, and there were different times while writing the book. And especially toward the end, when I got goosebumps, knowing that I could bring these stories to light. So obviously, any author wants people to appreciate their work, and I hope that people would appreciate this book. But it is a testament to these soldiers who were so brave. It's a great story, so I do hope people will read it. Even if you pick it up at the library, pick it up from your friend, I hope people will read it.
Yeah, I hope they do too. The book really, as a warrior, as a combat veteran, I can tell you that you've done a great service to those men, told their story, made them look as hard as they absolutely were, because those guys were hard as fucking anything. To jump in, snow, whatever, their life disregarded to support somebody else, even the person next to them in the stick. you've captured that. It's intense, and I'll tell you right now, we talked about how I watched The Dirty Dozen the other night prepping for you. I know their story is inspired by these Pathfinders, but this story is better, and I hope that someone puts it on the big screen, because it's absolutely a testament to what you've written and what those men did. Well,
here's what I hope to accomplish in my lifetime, that anybody ever says the sentence, "I watched The Dirty Dozen to prep for talking to you."
Yeah.
So, hey, yeah, absolutely. We will share links and help you promote, man, anything that you're doing. We'd love to have you on. We're big fans.
You're always welcome on the show, and for sure, when we come to New York, you don't have a choice. We're looking you up.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys. I really hope we can hang out sometime.
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right.
Thank you.
We'll stay in touch.
Yes.
All right. Bye. This is great.